All right, welcome Hope Grown Faith to another Monday Mom Mentor, where we are equipped and inspired to nurture the hope of Christ in our homes. And today I'm super excited to introduce you to Eryn Lynum, who is a master naturalist, which sounds like a very interesting thing. Erin, will you introduce yourself to us?
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Eryn Lynum, and I've been married to my husband, Grayson, for 14 years next week. And we have 4 kiddos. So we have 3 boys, ages 12, 10, and 8, and a daughter who is 5. And I am a certified master naturalist. So that means that I am trained to teach nature and understand all the things of plants and animals and ecosystems and how they all operate together. And I pursued that certification because I saw in nature so many materials to teach theology and who God is, especially with children, because they connect with things through their senses so much. And so I have a degree in biblical studies, and I wanted to pair that with this study in nature to really bring those together, just like Jesus did in the parables when he used sparrows and wildflowers and grains of sand and all these materials to teach truth. And so I do that through my writing, through my new book, Rooted in Wonder, and our podcast for kids, which is Nat Theo, Nature Lessons Rooted in the Bible.
Your podcast is really fun. I've been listening to it with my son. We love the one about the roly-polies. We were like, wait, they're not bugs?
Isn't that crazy? That's actually the most popular episode because I think so many kids just are fascinated with roly-polies. I mean, doing that episode, I became fascinated by them again. And yeah, it's so many things to explore and learn about.
That's so fun. I actually didn't even know they were called, I just called them like pill bugs. I've never, also, even just the name roly-poly itself is fun. But now that I know that they're also a bug, that's fun. Even more fun. So I got connected with Erin because I was talking about the sacred pathways over the last month. And somebody said, oh, have you read Erin's book? Because I was talking about the naturalist sacred pathway, the type of people who really connect with God more deeply when they're out in nature. And I said, no, I've not heard of this. And I discovered she has this amazing book about connecting with God through nature and how to do that with your kids. So I'm so excited to talk about that with you today.
I am also. Thank you.
All right. So tell me, how would you say the Bible and nature are connected? Because you said that you have this Bible degree and now you have this nature training. So how would you see them connect?
I think God connects them in a very intentional way. My husband and I, we met in Bible college. And when we were there, they taught us that there are 2 main ways that God reveals himself to us. And the first is special revelation. And that is, of course, God's written, active, inspired word, the scriptures. And then the second is natural revelation. And that's how God reveals himself to us through what he has made. And that comes from Romans 1:20 that says that God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world through what has been made, so that we are without excuse. And so just as my kids began growing up and getting more interested in nature, I kind of followed their curiosity and I started to see how these 2 revelations synthesize. Like theologians for hundreds of years talked about them as 2 books that we read together to better understand God.
Yes, that's right. I was just thinking about that. I learned about them as called the book of God's word and the book of God's works.
Yes.
It's pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, so I have a biology degree and I drew a lot closer to God through my degree because I was like, how could you possibly believe this just like turned up? Look at all this intention and beauty and math in nature. It's so amazing.
Yeah, it's so true. I tell people, like, I have a degree in biblical studies and I went to Bible college, but that was absolutely necessary. God's word is his first primary revelation to us, and it's what we get the gospel from. But nothing has strengthened my faith so much as diving into nature and science because of all of that evidence, that math, that design and intelligence that we see.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty amazing. So now not everybody here is going to, have a biology degree or be a master naturalist. So they may be thinking, well, I don't have that kind of knowledge and I don't have time to go and pursue that. But I think that probably just being outside in nature can help strengthen the faith of our families and ourselves. So can you talk a little bit about how spending time just being outside, you don't have to know things, just being outside can strengthen our family's faith?
I completely agree. And that's where I was. I mean, before a few years ago, I knew very little about the natural world. And I completely agree that just going outside and making that first intentional step, like I love that in Genesis 15, we hear about when God took Abram outside, and that's when he points to the stars and says, like, if you can number the stars, that's how many your descendants will be. And I love how that scripture begins because it says, God took Abram outside. That was the first thing he did. And then he anchored that promise of truth in a visual in nature. And I think we can do the same with our kids. The first step is take them outside, go with them. And then you can be intentional with that time by asking questions like, kids are naturally drawn to things like we talked about the roly polies. And you can just ask them, like, what does this reflect of God? Does it show that he has a sense of humor? Does it show that he is an artist or a designer or an engineer? Just start making those connections and using different language. And exactly that, talking about the sunset as God painting the horizon and the architecture of a beehive, and just start making those connections and reconnecting the dots between creation and creator.
I love that. That's amazing. So does that have anything to do with this phrase that you use called a wonder conservationist?
Yeah, that was a term that I kind of coined for Rooted in Wonder. When we think about conservation and the preservation of the natural world, we're thinking about preserving and protecting things. And that is so important because we are called to be stewards of what God has made. But also, I think equally important is conserving our children's sense of wonder, that curiosity that God put inside of them. Because if we don't protect that and nurture it, it does tarnish over time. I think so many of us adults have experienced that. I know I did. Like I grew up camping and hiking, but somewhere along the way, I just lost that sense of wonder. And my kids reawakened that within me. And then when I started seeing those connections of how nature teaches theological truths, that's when I started coming back to it. So I think it's so important to conserve the wonder that God has placed in our children by giving them all these exposures, taking them outside when they're excited about something. Like today, my 12-year-old son came to me and he's like, Mom, I know what I want to be when I grow up. I was like, okay, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he's like, I want to study mushrooms. I was like, mycology. Okay, let's study mycology. And it's good because that's actually like, we've been building up to that in our homeschool. And so we're doing a whole study on mushrooms. And yesterday we went out looking for mushrooms. And so picking up on those curiosities and then just fanning the flame, get all the library books, watch all the documentaries, go out and find the things outside, just conserve that sense of wonder.
I love that. That reminds me of a little while ago. I can't remember what we were doing. We're having a very quiet day at home, and my son came in bursting in and he said, Mom, there are so many bees on the lilac bush. So I gave him my phone and I said, okay, go take some pictures of them. And so he was taking slow motions. He actually got some really cool pictures in slow motions of these bees he got really close to, which is very brave of him.
That's so great.
And then we got some bee books out of the library, and then that was it. I mean, it didn't go much beyond that, but I just love that.
It will though. He'll remember that.
We'll just take the time and go take some pictures, right?
Exactly.
Because it is pretty amazing. All right. So no talk about the world outside and God's, created planet is quite complete these days without talking about climate change, because we know that, humans are causing mass extinctions, maybe not mass extinctions, but lots of extinctions because we're living in places where animals used to live. And so some of that is just like, well, where else are we going to live? And we have to grow food for ourselves. But some of it, I think, is probably, we just have to be more intentional about that. Anyway, so I'll let you talk about it instead of me. So how can we help our kids think about it and understand this idea of climate change? I know it can be super political. We'll try not to make it political. Like just what is it and how can we help our kids understand it?
Yeah, I think that's key, really addressing it from not a political standpoint, but a biblical standpoint. And this was something that I dove into researching pretty deeply for the book, and that we just have a lot of experience with. We live in Colorado. And while I was writing the book, it happened to be 2020, and it was the largest wildfire in Colorado's written history, was burning a few miles from our home. And this fire burned for 3 months. And so we had these days of just choking smoke. We couldn't go outside because it was so dangerous. And like ash falling from the sky, like snow, and piling up like on our cars. And every time you went outside, there's just this plume of smoke. And then like dusk would come and everything was glowing orange. Like talk about 2020 already being weird. It got real weird. And so
that's like apocalyptic.
Seriously, no, it seriously was. Like we're driving downtown, all the stores are closed with signs, everyone's in masks, and like it's like smoke and ash everywhere. So during this, my kids kept hearing, oh, it's because the earth is warming up and climate change. And so they would come to me with these questions. And I wanted to offer them more than just a shrug and like, I don't know, people are saying a lot of things. And so I started just thinking about it from a biblical standpoint and saying, you know what, this is a strong statement, but I think climate change began in the Garden of Eden when sin entered and the earth was cursed. We see that all of like that was the onset of decay and destruction. And so we as believers see the trajectory. We know that this planet is expiring, that's biblical. Now I can see from an unbeliever standpoint why that would breed panic and fear, like we see in a lot of the climate change conversation. If they think that this is all we get, this planet, that would be pretty scary and devastating. But we as believers, we can point our kids to the hope that God is a God who is making all things new. This is not all we get. And so we can really look at the facts of climate change and even like getting into the details of like, this isn't the only time in history when the earth has warmed up. And so there are these cycles and patterns. We can help our kids see those facts so that one, they're just not terrified, thinking like this has never happened before. And then more importantly, just pointing them to that biblical truth. Like, well, yes, the earth is decaying and things are going extinct and things are changing because they've been changing ever since the earth was cursed, but God is making all things new. And we have that promise of hope, but also coupling that with the importance of stewarding what God has made. And I said that earlier, just the importance of, we're called to steward and protect what God has made. And also, I think that conservation is a gospel issue because what we see in creation is a revelation of God. And so these things that he has made serve as evidence for who he is. The more we have to work with to take our kids outside and point them back to God, that is gospel work. And so I think it's important to be protecting what he's given us and using that as materials to teach biblical truth.
Wow, that is really good. So do you have any like tips for ways that you can help kids grow in that? Like it seems like such a big thing. So big. Yeah. Is it more than just turning off the tap when you're brushing your teeth?
Yeah, it is. I think there's more hands-on things that we can do. Always beginning with the why and going back to Genesis when God planted Adam in the Garden of Eden to tend and care for it and saying, we're called to do the same thing and to take care of what God has made. One, because he called it good back at creation. So we should call our friends to Jesus. And so giving them that why, and then taking them out. One thing, like I've done things with my kids, like we noticed there was an area in our neighborhood with a lot of trash over by the creek. And so we went and picked up the trash that day. Another one I like doing is we really love birds. Our family, we're big bird watchers, and around rivers and creeks and lakes, anywhere that there's people fishing, you can find fishing line in the trees, and birds will take that line and weave it into their nests and they get strangled. A lot of birds die that way. And so a very simple way that we can help God's creation is by taking our kids out, collecting that fishing line and throwing it away. So just little things like that, helping them to make those connections about taking care of what God has made. Planting is another good one. My kids and I, we plant native plants in our yard and learn about, how you were talking about those bees. We get to see, we have all these insects now because we planted these native plants, and we get to see the whole systems and cycles that God has created.
That's very cool. So let's say that you don't live in a place where there are people fishing or even maybe a place with a pond. So what if you have a person who lives in the middle of the city? There's usually some sort of park around, but how can people who are maybe not outdoorsy people or people who live in the middle of the city, how can people do that? What you're talking about with their constrictions?
That's a great question. And it's one that I definitely address in the book because it's so important, because that is the reality of a lot of people. And it was for us as well. We didn't always live in Colorado. We've been here 7 years, and our enamor with nature really began in the city, in Kansas City, Missouri. And we just saw, as our kids were getting older, this connection that they were making between nature and God, and just like these spiritual connections and experiences. So we started seeking out every pocket of nature we could find. There was this little 3-mile trail at the edge of the city that we would go to twice a week, and we would just walk that trail. We knew that trail like the back of our hand. We would find every little thing, even the green area down by the park. And so even if you have to drive a while, just finding those little pockets of nature, you'll be surprised how many there are, and making them your own. And then also all the benefits of bringing nature indoors. And whether that be potted plants or freshly cut flowers or a fish tank, or we love hanging bird feeders and bird houses around our house, or even like we have ones that attach to the windows that the birds come into and we can see them right outside our window. And so just giving our kids all those exposures to God's creation, even if you're inside during those winter months, or if you're in the city.
That's right. I was just thinking about winter too. Yeah. And winter is long here, like 8 months long. So,
Yes.
but we can still be outside in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
I was also thinking, where I am, there's a lot of weeds in the middle of the cracks in the pavement too.
Yes.
Weeds grow everywhere. There's usually trees. There's the sky. I am always in awe of the clouds and the sky. It's different all the time. Unless it's a,
Yes.
completely cloudless day, the clouds are doing something different than they did yesterday. So there's nature all around us, even if we live it, in a apartment building or something. But I love the suggestions that you have, even about bringing nature indoors. Those are really good ideas. Fun. Okay, so I have another question for you that I know that you can answer because it was in one of your suggested questions, and I thought it was so interesting. So how can experiences in nature show our kids absolute truths in a society prone to relativism? Tell me about that.
This is so important. And it's something that helped me so much as a mom, just raising kids in this postmodern arena where culture is saying that, hey, your truth is good for you, my truth is good for me. And even like, I think we're postmodern now, and that like they're saying, this is my truth and it needs to be your truth also. And so our kids are growing up in this world that is so confusing and so chaotic. And they want definitive lines. Like our kids do well with boundaries and limits and definitive, definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to see that experiences in nature can show that to our kids. And I love, there's this quote from the classic novel 1984 by George Orwell. And that book's all about like, it's a novel, but trying to like do away with books and truth and knowledge. And in it, he wrote, "The solid world exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard and water is wet." And so we can take our kids outside and they come face to face with these realities that they don't get to change. And one story I share in the book about this is we were up exploring Rocky Mountain National Park, and we live pretty close to there. And there's this lake that we visit often. And we had arrived there, and my husband took our 3 boys ahead to the lake to go fishing. And I hung back with our daughter by the creek playing. And then eventually we went to rejoin the boys, and we round the bend in the trail to this crazy scene where my husband has the boys backed against a tree. And in the water right by them is this moose calf and its mama. And my husband explained to me what had just happened right before we entered the scene was that the boys were fishing, and this moose calf, about a year old, comes running into the water right by them. So my husband like gets them away. And my husband grew up in the wild. He's very familiar with wildlife. And he knew that by the age of this moose, the mama was definitely around. So he is looking all over, and sure enough, this mama moose, massive animal, just comes like huffing and puffing out of the woods towards them. She's like walking down the trail towards them. So my husband gets the boys out of her way so she can safely get to her calf. But it's experiences like those. And that's not the only one. Like we live on a lake. We've had moose in our lake, a black bear in our driveway, a mountain lion on our road. All these experiences show us that we don't get to tell nature what to do. It's going to act as God created it to act. And like when we are out hiking with our kids, we pay close attention to the weather. And like yesterday, we were hiking and we're getting kind of further back and it starts thundering. And we're like, oh, time to get off the mountain. And these things like show our kids, we don't get to tell the weather what it's going to do. We have to cooperate with those natural laws. And I think that speaks deeply to a child that there are natural laws and that they don't get to decide what truth and reality is. God already did.
Wow, that is actually really powerful. I wasn't expecting that. Wow. Great answer. Good job.
Thank you. It was so powerful for me as a mom because we just need these things to anchor our kids' mindsets into, because this world is kind of going crazy sometimes.
I know. I was just thinking that connects to so many of the conversations that are having right now. Like, oh, I get to even just pick whether I'm a boy or a girl. Like,
there's nature.
Nature, yeah, acts the way God made it to act. Yeah. Wow. Very powerful. Thanks for sharing that. So we have a few minutes left. I also wanted to talk about devices. So one struggle that I have, and I know that probably 99.9% of parents have, is that our kids would rather be playing video games or on a device or on a computer, or even like listening to an audiobook than free playing outside. And okay, just a quick story. So we went camping for 2 weeks, and the very first night that we went camping, I was so proud of my kids. One of my kids just grabbed a stick and he starts like playing tic-tac-toe in the dirt with his brothers. I'm like, oh, you still know how to play. And he's 12.
Yes. Awesome.
It was amazing. Like just when there was no access to devices, they didn't even ask for them. It was amazing. But normally we don't have the opportunity to just say, there's nothing, right? To just pull them completely out. Unless you're a camping family, we can't say, well, I guess we could say no devices. But do you have any suggestions on how we can help our kids value that time in nature? How we get them off their devices and get them outside? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. First, I'm in that 99.9%. I have 4 kids and they enjoy devices and technology. And that's the world that, they're growing up in and that we need to equip them for. We love teaching our kids to be creators instead of consumers. And if they're using a device more often than just like taking in content, we want them to be creating content and using that God-given creativity. But one analogy I use to talk about media and devices is invasive plants in nature. So an invasive plant is a plant that does not belong where it is. And you might not even know that. It might even look pretty, but it's not natural to the area. Yeah. Like there's so many examples of these invasive plants. And I use that as an analogy to be like technology. And there are 3 similarities. So for one, invasive plants are a recent problem. In the past couple hundred of years, they were brought in to lend exotic beauty to our gardens. Likewise, technology is a recent issue. Like ours is the first generation of parents really navigating this with our kids and this highly digital world. So they're both recent problems and they both came with good intentions. Like we saw these plants in other lands, we're like, oh, those will be great. Let's bring them over. Also, technology came with great benefits and applications. We're using it right now to do this interview. But the third similarity is that left unchecked, both of them just overrule the landscape. So invasive plants have the upper hand in a landscape over the plants that actually belong there. They don't have their natural predators. So they just start consuming the landscape. Likewise, technology, when left unchecked, consumes the landscape of childhood. It has the upper hand on our kids' attention. But both of these things can be brought back into balance. Like I've seen it here working as a naturalist in our community. We have areas, like I remember one that I was exploring that it had just been ravished with like invasive plants and trash and just really, really ruined area. But volunteers over 10 years worked to restore it. And now it has its native plants and animals and creatures back. And likewise with our kids, we might feel like, oh, it's too far gone. They're too addicted. That's not true. Like, yes, it's overwhelming. It will take time and intentionality and small efforts, but it can be done. So one thing we like doing with our kids that's real practical is before they use a device, and they don't use them every day, maybe a couple times a week, they get to do Minecraft or watch something. But before they do that, we want them to read something or be read to, create something, clean something, and play outside. Read, create, clean, play. We want to front load the more important parts of our day. And then once they've done those things, yeah, you can watch a show.
Oh, I love that. That's a really great paradigm. And where you're talking about invasive species, like that's amazing how they are so relevant to our digital lives. Wow.
Yeah.
So what was that? Read, create, clean, play. We did something similar and then kind of gave up, to be honest. Our kids don't have a lot of
comes and goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those kind of things, you do them for a while and then hopefully they kind of become part of who you are, right? So, yeah,
exactly.
Go play outside. We enjoy playing outside. And maybe if you're lucky, then they'll enjoy playing outside so much that they won't want to come inside.
Yes.
Which has been happening to children all over the world for thousands of years. They play outside and they don't want to come in to do chores, right?
Yes, exactly.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Erin. Can you just remind us again of the name of your book and the name of your podcast and where we can find you online?
Yes, thank you. So the name of my new book is Rooted in Wonder, Nurturing Your Family's Faith Through God's Creation. And that's available on Amazon or wherever you buy books. And our podcast is for kids and it's called Nat Theo. That's short for natural theology. And it's nature lessons rooted in the Bible. So we take these fun nature facts and then bring in biblical truth to really teach these two things together. That's on my website as well. You can find everything along with them. I have a lot of free printable activity guides and devotions on my website that you can do with your kids. And that's my name, which is spelled a little funny. It's ErynLynum.com.
That's right. ErynLynum.com. And we will, I'll link to that. So if people
so
forget how to spell that, you can just click on the link. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I was going to call you Lynum.
There you go. It's just like in your mind there. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.